already working his magic.
That's right. That's right. So the Lean Enterprise Institute, we've been around for 20 years. Founded by Dr. James Womack, who was a researcher with MIT and kind of conducted a sort of seminal global benchmarking study of the automotive industry back in the 70s and 80s. And through that project, discovered what he and his team sort of later call lean thinking. Basically discovered that through Toyota and the way that they were running their business. And I guess kind of the rest is a bit of history. The Lean Enterprise Institute, we are a research and education nonprofit institute in Cambridge, Mass. And we essentially do 4 things. We've published 20 books or various other learning materials, kind of starting with our founder, Dr. James Womack, who's a kind of prominent author. We also convene large events. In fact, just last week, Bruno and I were in San Diego for LEI's annual Lean Transformation Summit. We do education in public settings and at companies. And lastly, we do what we call co-learning partnerships for the purpose of action research. That's actually what I'm responsible for. And so there's a handful of organizations that we collaborate with to sort of put our best thinking into practice in a hands-on way, and through that learn kind of what we can that can be shared out with our community, sort of the world at large. My background, which I'm sure I'll reference today, before I joined LEI 4 years ago, I spent 9 years with Starbucks Coffee Company. So for the question of who's the odd man out on this panel, that would be me. I don't come out of the digital world or the IT world, but out of retail. And at that time, sort of Starbucks was maybe the first retailer that took these kind of traditionally, I guess, manufacturing ideas and put them into a retail application. And so I was a part of that journey. Long answer. Tom.
Great. Tom Pater. I am the build capability leader for Nationwide. Having some mic.
Really talk really loud until we get this figured out. Build capability leader for Nationwide. I have responsibility for things like Lean and Agile and DevOps, and Nationwide is a really large IT shop. We have about 9,000 people in technology, spend about $1.5 billion, and run about 275 Agile teams within the enterprise. And we'll, hopefully in my discussion today, we'll get to talk a little bit about how do you take a really traditional financial services company and make it run really, really fast. How do you take it and make it agile, make it lean, and how can you apply that in your companies?
Cool. Thank you, guys. Before we start, can I do a quick survey here? Who here is familiar with Agile? Please raise your hand. Okay, so we don't have to explain that, right? Who here is familiar with Lean? And not Lean startups, not Lean UX, Lean. Okay, so good. So the talk here today is the context for this presentation is that we see in the market, the so-called digital transformation. We see all the research that goes there, talking about the need for a cultural change, right? So this actually comes top in the list of the challenges when executives surveyed by Forrester, Gartner, when they list what are the biggest challenges in actually getting traditional business into the digital era. The shift on culture comes first, right? This is from all the recent research, and actually even research that dating back to 4 or 5 years ago. So, and why is that? In our vision is just because mainly traditional business. We're not talking startups here, right? So traditional business came from decades of a way of managing that's optimized for reliability and for risk avoidance, right? So this naturally make them management systems very rigid, right? Very averse to risk, right? So, and now there we need for teams to actually take over, to take initiative, to propose and to run things differently, right? And the culture is just not there, right? So we follow executives that our customers and other companies that we talk to, then not in the limelight, but in the backstage, they say, nah, man, like this fail fast, fail often thing. In my company, this is just BS, right? This is just not there. I don't have any room for failure, right? So, and then it generates the opposite thing, right? So kind of our CEOs and our executives, just be innovative, bring new things, right? But the culture is just not there to actually act on anything new, just because no one is going to take a risk, right? So if you take the risk and you fail, you're fired. It's two Fs, right? So how actually you come from a culture that has been running for decades in this environment, and take it to a place where there's actually people, you're experimenting and you're testing new things and you're running fast, right? So how you do this change, right, from point A, from point B, and we think that this is the question like many people are trying to sort out, right? And we think we have some practical advice here using some lean principles, right? Some very material things. So with that, I would like to ask Josh, could you actually explain a little bit how, use your slide here. Can you explain a little bit of how actually we see change in the lean principles?
Sure. So I think what I want to maybe just start us off with is a little bit of foundational thinking, and then you see this model here, and I'll kind of try to build to the sort of thinking within that model.
Hard to hear.
Hard to hear. Am I on? Am I on? Check if I'm on. Now am I on?
You're on.
Now you are.
Okay, I've been on. Okay. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out. So what I was saying is I just want to offer a little bit of kind of foundational thinking to build our discussion around. You see this model up here. Let me kind of build to that, explain a little bit what's kind of underneath it. So this idea of kind of lean thinking in practice. It's really about this sort of relationship between creation and consumption. I'm going to get a little wonky here for a minute. Forgive me. And over time, we sort of, through the practice of lean thinking, we want to get better at creating things and at the same time sort of consuming less in that process. Sort of this principle of just enough, I guess. So in the pursuit of kind of making things better, both better things, but also the kind of the way that those things are made, foundational to our kind of thinking way is this notion of PDCA, plan, do, check, act, this sort of learning cycle that we can engage in and get better. So lean thinking in practice then is really about transformation, about change. But what, I guess, is sort of an important question. So it kind of depends on the organizational level as to what is experiencing transformation. At the team member level, at the sort of worker level, maybe what many of us operate at times, the object of transformation is typically some product, be it physical, digital, or service. At the team leader level, sort of above that, the object of transformation is the team member, him or herself. So this idea of really developing people as a primary aim, we want to talk a lot about that today as sort of core to this notion of creating cultural change. At the organizational level then, the object might be various systems, processes, management systems, work systems, and the like. Now to get practical about things, which is, it was funny when we were, as we've come to Austin, South by Southwest, if you go into the discovery section of your app and you search practical, this is the only session that comes up.
Yes.
Which I thought is kind of funny and hopefully kind of sets our objective for today. But to make all of sort of this wonky thinking practical, and where we can see this relationship between creation, consumption, where we can see acts of transformation, we're really talking about the work itself, the work that we do. That's where we can see, I think, lean thinking in practice actually occur. Now, when it comes to work, we think about work in very specific terms. We think about the steps. required, the stuff that you need, some aspect of time, either frequency or sort of by when. And the combination of those things is going to generate some output that will meet customers' needs. Now, customers aren't simply end users, but we think about customers like the next step. So if I'm creating something and I'm going to hand it off to someone else, what will that customer require to do what they need to do? And what do they need from me kind of in this overall process? And so anyway, this kind of way that I'm describing contains within it many behaviors, attitudes, assumptions, what some may know of the MIT professor emeritus Edgar Schein, who described 3 layers of culture: artifacts, values, assumptions. And so this approach that we're describing, this lean stuff, really contains all those things in it. And so if it's about transformation, if it's about work, if it's about improving the work, we kind of offer this model to offer sort of a suggestion on where to begin, where to start in the effort to create cultural change. And we sort of believe that the best place to start is through improving the work. So a lot of our stories today that we want to share are just in that light, stories of how we have, in pursuit of cultural change, for the reasons that Bruno was explaining, for the sake of cultural change, how we go about that in a practical way by simply focusing on and improving the way we work.
Yeah, I think that's very core to the story, the stories we're going to hear here today. Right? So there's the foundation of this research is like there's a communication, right? So the work affects the culture, and the culture affects the work, right? So what we're saying here, what the Lean principles advocate is actually, don't try to start with the culture itself. It's like chasing your shadow, right? It's just trying to change your culture just by fixing a new set of values in the wall, or painting the walls, or putting some nice bean bags out there, or distributing free food. Won't change the culture, or will have little effect on the culture itself. What will really change the culture is actually change the work, focus and change the work in the daily activities of people, what people do, and culture will change will follow. Culture will change itself. Right? This is the main theory here, and here we have some people that have been through it, and can provide us some examples on how actually that happened. So can I start with you there, Tom? Can you tell a little bit of how actually you went about your lean transformation journey and how actually you saw that at work?
Absolutely. I'm going to, working in the spirit of lean, I'm going to run an experiment and try and turn this mic back on. If we get that crazy screech again, we'll just go without it. Okay, maybe this will work. I'm going to set this down here, and I'll just try to talk as loud as I possibly can. So for us, when you think of Agile, we were a really traditional waterfall shop. And but all the way back in 2002, when Agile was certainly not what it is today. It was kind of a dirty word, especially in big enterprises like Nationwide. We had our first Agile team in 2002, but we kind of piddled along with it from 2002 to 2009. In fact, I was telling Bruno a story last night that my boss at the time, the former CTO, had told me, he said, look, if you say the word Agile one more time, you're fired. And of course I looked at him and said, Agile, 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 come on, put me out of my misery. And so there was this daily perseverance, but we still, even though there were a lot of us that were really pressing forward with this transformation, we couldn't make headway, not in a company of Nationwide size. It was interesting that Nationwide.com was Agile. I had those teams, or some other teams were Agile, but it wasn't making a big difference for the company overall. What we really had to do was say, how do we actually create a transformation that scales across the enterprise? And to do that for us, in addition to focusing on the behaviors, I tend to think of this idea of focusing on the work of the daily behavior, not just of our associates, but actually of the management team. Because we would, think about Agile. It's really hard as an associate or as a frontline employee if we go to you and say, hey, guess what? You have more say in your processes. You have more say in how you work every day. We're going to let you create a fun environment. Very few people
very few developers or testers or whoever would say, no, I'm not really bought into that. But it really scared the hell out of the management team sometimes as far as, what do you mean I don't get to assign the work to people? What do you mean I don't get to do this? So we had to work on the behaviors of the management team more so than we did the actual front line. And that included things like the job of a manager is really to be a coach for the team, not to be a taskmaster. How much time do you spend coaching? What is the coaching kata? How do you actually change the work of management itself? And those are really critical things that we had to deal with. For us, that was the lean management system. And I know we'll get to talk a little bit about that as we go along, but really the idea for us was change daily behavior, change it not just for frontline associates, but also for management. Start small, model lines, experiments, and slowly build that out.
Cool. Lule, can you talk a little bit about how that experience was in TD Ameritrade?
Sure. So TD Ameritrade, when we started the lean journey, it really was, at first started out as a practical sort of call centers and operations and what you would consider to be sort of the easy pickings of lean. And what happened is, so I'm in product development and product design, and for much of the folks who were in my area, they felt that they were a little too good for lean, that it was for the worker bees and not for the thinkers. And what has been really interesting is actually how to convince these folks to embrace it, because I do fundamentally believe that lean is not an intellectual exercise, it is a lived experience. And in many ways, if it's not in your muscle memory, it's a failure. And so one of the things that we had to think about is sort of thinking sort of like you've heard of the whole brain sort of concept, where some people will hear about the work getting improved and they think that you are trying to suck the life out of them, right? Because they are creative folks who feel like, what do you mean I have to think of from A to B to C and handoffs and all this other stuff, and everything that I do is waste. What you consider waste is my creative process, right? And then there's some folks who are much more regimented in their process, that heard of the linguistic sort of aspects of lean and felt like you were trying to bring down some large state operation of like making them brainwashed into thinking of one way of thinking. And so one of the things that was really interesting about deploying lean and what would consider to be sort of thought concept business and not necessarily operational, was making sure that people could hear what they wanted to hear. And so one of the things that we did was actually break apart how we did the work so that they could think of ways of how to deploy the work. So traditionally in product management, we had folks that owned specific products, and we broke that apart and made it about the value chain of the process rather than owning one particular product. And that fundamentally changed a few things. One, it really sort of killed this sort of silo thinking of my product versus your product, and you're starting to think about the whole value chain and how everybody's graded on the success of that entire chain and not necessarily on one piece of it. The second thing it did is it created an appreciation for different people's expertise. And that is actually really fundamental to lean, the empathy you have for other people's work product and how their process works. And so that really made an appreciation where the folks that were more in the operation side of my product business had a real deep appreciation of the struggles of the folks that were working on design, and vice versa. And they would actually go see, as you'd say in lean, and have an appreciation for their work. So there were a few things we did. One was making sure that we messaged it and made it feel like it wasn't a dictatorship, but also appealed to people's way of thinking. But also making sure we broke apart the work so that encouraged inter-silo behavior in the way that they delivered the product. And those things really made a difference, such as the case that we had one individual who was really, really adamant that this was the big state trying to take over his brain. And he was a real expert in the system, though. He was a very deep knowledge base. And we didn't want to lose some people like that. It's one thing to lose folks who are resistant to change but are not adding value. It's another to lose folks who are deeply ingrained in the work that is done, but have a struggle with adoption of change, right? Once he saw the work being broken up, once he saw an appreciation for craftsmanship that lean did for him, he became one of the biggest advocates. And on the other end of the spectrum, we had really creative people, like in my UX design area, that were really appreciating how much that their work could see the light of day, right? One of their biggest struggles is I give the programmer my stuff and it looks like it has a three-headed monster and the beauty of my design is dead. And that, so again, that interdiscipline and empathy was really magical to see. But I think ultimately, however, Lean, frankly, or Agile, in my opinion, doesn't work without managerial courage. I find that that's probably what's the biggest absent factor in a lot of firms that espouse Lean philosophy and don't really walk the walk. And I think that that is something that is not always hard to foster. But I ultimately believe without courage, without personal courage, it becomes a real easy, slippery road to lip service.
Cool. Let me tell my story. This is one of my most emotional stories. Is that the transformation of CI&T was a transformation of how we actually changed. We similarly to you, Tom, we're adapting 10 years ago. We're adapting Agile, and we're transforming everybody. Coming from the rational unified process, like a little waterfall-ish way, and coming everybody to Agile. And in our leadership team was completely lost, right? So we were running our leadership style was just managing by numbers, right? So manage the numbers, right? Just a big stick, and if the numbers don't confess what you want to, just stick, just more stick, longer stick, right? Stick harder. When we embraced Agile and was really thriving, and then we saw the energy and the results that was bringing to the company. This is the future, but we would go down to the Agile literature, and we say like the role of the leadership is just empower people and get out of the way, right? So we look at it a little bit puzzled. Said, okay, but it just says what you don't do, but it don't say what you do, right? What the leadership do with them, right? So, and how to empower people. Right? So how I do that? How I empower people and get out of the way in a meaningful way. And we started up, and when we discovered Lean, like 3 years after this, was like 3 years of intense mess, and just trying to scale Agile we were doing like 1,200 people already. So when we found Lean, we read something that really kind of clicked for us. That you do this, you empower people. The leader has to be deeply knowledgeable about the work. Right? So this was profoundly different from what we seen. Right? So we're in a world where like the Dilbert cartoons are very famous, and they're very famous and resonate people for a reason. Right? So. Managers are usually seen as stupid. They're not as knowledgeable as the individual members of the team, right? And there's this conflict, right? So we saw that was light for us. Like actually the leader has to be knowledgeable, has to have a deep understanding of the work underneath her or him, right? This changed everything for us. So we just had to get back. Fortunately, our leaders they all came from the ranks, so they were all former developers, former designers, former testers, right? So, but they had forgotten their trade, right? So they were in a position now I'm a manager. Now I don't go down to work and actually understand what's going on and go into the trenches in the hole with my team, right? So we saw that was the way to go. So this was the transformation that we required. Like we need our leaders actually to actually solve problems by actually getting down in the trenches, understanding the problem with their teams, getting to understand more and more of the work, so they could actually coach the people and empower the people of their teams. Right? The thing was, to us to ask our leaders to do that, we actually had to set the example. Right? So we couldn't just ask them to it. You go there and do this. Right? So because we knew that. If we didn't set the example, our leaders wouldn't do this. So nobody follows advice. People follow example, right? That's what the people do, right? So and mainly examples from their leadership, right? So we decided then to start with us, change our work. Right? So then we got what's called Hoshin Camry, which is the A3 method of planning to the senior leadership. So we changed the planning process, the strategic planning process, so we could practice that way of thinking. So our planning process usually, as many other companies out there used to be, we go like only the senior leadership to a nice resort somewhere, and wait for some light coming from the sky and enlighten us and give us all the good ideas, right? So this process completely changed, right? So it started to be much more engaging. So it went from engaging like 12 people to 65, 80 people in the beginning, and now it's like more 150 people involved in the planning process of the company, because it's actually going there and understanding what the gaps are and involving the people. So it changed the way we worked, and then the PDCA of that, like not only on the planning, but actually all across the year, how you do that, how you do the checks of that. So we changed our work and changed us, and changed the way we ask people when there's a problem. We don't just, we changed, we saw the behavior in us changing and the behavior in them changing. There's no more, that kind of an adage that is, I think, brought such a sadness and to the mankind, which is like, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions, right? This is a terrible thing. Like this, and actually, we changed that. We changed, like, no, the people embrace the problems, and it's natural to have problems, and then you create a culture that's open to experimentation, and open to the things that you create room for failure. That's with tolerance for failure, right? So it completely changed us and completely changed the leadership style.
If I could add there, I think that you're really onto something in that the lean management system we think of as a more efficient, think Toyota Productions Management System. We think of it as a more efficient management style, more efficient for as far as the company's concerned, but I think that's only the secondary benefit. The primary benefit is that you're modeling those ideal behaviors to your associates. So if you want frontline associates, developers, testers, others, focused on problem solving and root cause problem solving, the best way to do that is for the management team to model that themselves. And then truly, I think if you're truly a lean manager or a lean executive, you have to believe that the people that do the processes best know how to improve those processes. Not staff level organizations, staff level functions. If you want to figure out a better way to write Java code, the easiest way is to talk to a Java programmer, not to talk to somebody that's been removed from programming for years. And I'm aware of the irony from leading a staff organization within Nationwide. But for all of the coaches and all of my teams, we really focus on the idea that your job is to elicit, to coach, and to bring out the best thinking from people, not to try to dictate or create processes or audits, those sorts of things.
So Tom, kind of a story that builds on some of these concepts like empathy and management really close to the work, and even some of those leadership behaviors. So one of the organizations that LEI collaborates with is a group of seafood restaurants in the kind of New England area. Some of you may be familiar with Legal Seafoods. And this all kind of reminds me of an experience we had recently where I was with the executive chef for the business, his culinary director, and the chef of one of their sites. They have 35 restaurants kind of scattered around mostly New England. And I remember kind of to start the day when we were together, there was a lot of frustration that the executive chef was sharing, specifically around the items that were coming off of the saute station. So you guys can kind of imagine maybe a kitchen in Legal Seafoods. They have 6 kind of stations: a grill station, an oven station, a saute station, a fry pantry, and what they call raw bar. And there was sort of recurring customer, or what they call guest complaints about specifically things that come out of saute. And so I sort of suggested that we just go spend some time and observe the work at the saute station, just to try to understand maybe what was going on. Legal Seafoods team has since come to describe this activity as mindful observation, which I think is kind of a nice term. And so we went, and I remember when we walked up to the kitchen, they saw Nick was working the saute station. And the restaurant chef sort of turned to me and said, "Oh, this is going to be bad. Nick's just not our best cook." I said, "Okay." And so we watched for a little while. And something happened. I think the chef suggested to the sous chef that they make a change. And so Nick was swapped out for Luis. And everyone was excited because he was the most sort of skilled cook at this station. But to sort of get it beyond just, I guess, the people that may perform this job, what we did is we spent some time taking a key item that they prepare at that station, cioppino, and really, in great detail, documenting the specific work associated with that. And we discovered that it took a certain amount of time. I think it was like kind of 200 seconds of time from the chef, or from the cook, to prepare that specific item. Now, it turns out that the rate of that item being ordered was significantly less than that. It would come in, I don't know, like every 50 seconds or so. And so there's kind of some simple math that you can do. And our conclusion, basically, from having gathered those facts, was that in order for whoever would work that station to be successful, you would need 4 saute cooks. And the consequence of not having 4, simply by kind of the math behind how long it takes and how often I need to do it, if you don't have 4, then the inevitable outcome is that there will be all kinds of shortcuts made. So in this case, you might start cioppino for one order. 5 minutes later, whatever, another one comes in, and so, I'm just going to add that order's ingredients to this. Now you got some things that have been cooking for 5 minutes, some things that are fresh, and you're just going to scoop it out. So you can imagine what the sort of quality implications are of that. Now, the fact of the matter is, the way that this station is laid out, you cannot physically fit 4 humans in this station. So literally, by the way that the kind of recipe exists and that work is designed, it is impossible for a worker to be successful at that station. Had nothing to do with Nick, Luis, or even the kind of attempted, sort of made popular by chefs on TV, yelling at the cook to work harder culture that exists. None of those things would actually address it. The only way to solve that problem would be to redesign the recipe itself and the way that that item would be prepared. And I share that because it sort of contains all those things. I mean, we developed a sense of empathy for those workers. It was bringing the executive chef, who's like a really high-powered kind of executive in this company, down to the details of the work, really engage them in that through this active mindful observation. And the cultural implications of that, I think, kind of speak for themselves. I mean, it wasn't, again, permissible then, by their own conclusion, by the executive chef's own conclusion, to just continue in this kind of vocal, high stress, I'm going to sort of yell speed out of you culture. They needed to approach it in a different way, a way that really engaged in improving the work. Anyway.
I feel really strongly about this. We often say, people are not broken, processes are. And that's one of the things that's really inspiring to me about Lean is that it also comports with my own personal feeling that people matter. And so it gives you the ability to create a culture that has all the things that are, sort of trappings of capitalism requires, right? Success, profitability, et cetera. But the way you do it still retains dignity and work quality and satisfaction for people. I do think, though, again, for those who do it for lip service, they put a danger to all of us who try to live it authentically. The one example, so you asked us to be radically, is it practical? Was it?
Yes.
So practical. So I thought I'd share with you a practical sort of change we did in our annual planning. So typically, corporations like ours, they usually take the MDs off to one place to do the senior level planning for the year. And then this middle tier management goes to another sort of camp to do their planning. And the folks that actually do the work and bring in the dollars for the company don't really get to do any planning. Maybe a barbecue along the side. And so one of the things that I did in my division of TD Ameritrade is I broke apart that model. So we adopted a lot of the Lean tools, and when we were adopting them, the desire was to do it fast, and I felt that slow and deep was much better planned. So we would actually keep on practicing one particular Lean tool over and over again before we'd move on to the next thing until it became, as I said, muscle memory. So last 2 years ago, we started this thing where we broke apart this concept of clusters of management would go off to planning sessions. And so we integrated essentially 4 lean tools in our offsite. And what we did was the first day, it was just my own leadership team. And I was responsible to be the teacher. So I had the pen, if you will. And there were 4 artifacts we used. We have what we consider to be our manifesto as a team that we author each year and retinker. So I had the pen, but the folks in the room had to give me sort of direction as to how to use the pen. We had our planning session, which was the first tier of Howell Carnival that we did. So that was really sort of sticking the sort of the flag on the mountain to say this is what we're going to be in 3 years' time. So that's the first realm of the Howell Carnival planning, which is more horizon-based. And then we had some team building exercises, and then lastly, we've incorporated what is called skills matrix in our world, which is what you owe to people to lift their skills, right? It's not just a negotiation of people giving you their labor. You should leave them better skilled afterwards. And so one of the things we do in skills matrix is not only identify the skills our associates want to develop, but we had to figure out, like, how do we do that? And so we gamified it, because we realized that most people really, just sitting around working on a skill is not really as appealing to them as gamifying it. So we gamified it, and we would do skits and recitals, and essentially do things like almost like a PhD dissertation of being asked certain fundamental questions about the skill you were trying to acquire. And that is all we did during that offsite. And at the beginning of that offsite, it was me with my pen and my directs. The next day, their direct showed up. I gave up all my pens, and I was just an observer. And my directs ran the session. Same artifacts, same planning session. Howell Carnival level 2 kicked in. If they had anything to negotiate with me because they were changing the plan on me, because remember, you're giving them the pen. It's not lip service. They could change the plan on you. They'd come back to me and negotiate with me, and I would negotiate with them, and that level changed the second day. Third day, their directs ran the whole enchilada, and they had the pen. And in the end, the lowest rung of the team was the one that had the pen, both on planning as well as our mission as a culture. And it was really powerful. It unlocked so much ability and inspiration and engagement on the level of people that it still rings true to us 6 months down the planning season, that it's something we revisit when we revisit our Howell Carnival planning sessions. And it sounds like a lot of gushy, soft stuff, but the reality is, throughout this cycle, what I tell people all the time is, we produce now in a quarter what we used to produce in 2 years. We have more AUM and assets than we ever did before. So in the end, the business works out when done well. So as soft and gushy as it feels, I fundamentally believe people are flesh and bone. And so they need to feel inspired and empowered and not scared constantly for them to produce the best value for the company. So it's really been a transformation and a humbling experience for myself, as well as the folks that are the leaders in my part of the organization.
That's really cool that you touched the aspect that, because we go to I've been to some other sessions here, and it looks like we need a new type of leadership, that new breed of leaders that will come from no one knows where. And I hear stories here. It's about to work with what we have and trust that people will develop and get there in a continuous and grow themselves as leaders. So I like to ask you how many people you change, for example, to do this transformation, or you're done, you actually work with the people you have. Do you kind of import the new generation of leaders to do this, or just?
From my, I would say probably 15% of new, 15 to 20% of new leaders and generation, and then the rest of it is a transformation of our own teams. And they are different people. And people tell us they're different people in other arenas of their life as well, not just at work.
What about nationwide?
Whenever we're going through the transformations and largely are complete at this point in time, we treated our frontline associates with kind of white glove. We think very few people come into the office thinking, how can I screw things up? How can I not transform? How can I really put Nationwide in a bad position and get myself terminated. I mean, it just doesn't happen. Every once in a while you have kind of bad apples that you have to deal with. But we don't have the same philosophy with management, because you can spend years of work that one really determined, especially within middle management where I think transformation lives and dies, can really sabotage the whole thing. So we will move swiftly if we have a member of the management team that is actively sabotaging the transformation if they believe that lean and or agile is not the way to go. So I would put it maybe as far as how many came along with the journey. It's a fairly good number, but I would put our transitions within management slightly higher than the 15 to 20%. I don't have any concrete numbers, but I mean, it's you leading this for such a large organization, you really get to see some crazy things. I remember just a couple years ago in one of our acquisitions, the manager had said, had looked directly at me. We were changing the way that her teams operated, and she said, "I'm not doing that, and you can't." I've been told not to curse. It's not, you can't make me. And actually, I just kind of looked at her and said, I can. I mean, I can't, but I can terminate you. So you are not allowed to treat your associates like they are your personal minions, so to speak, that there's a new way of operating. So we're pretty resolute with our management team that you're not allowed to sabotage what we're trying to put in place.
Cool. Well, it resonates with our experience as well. As I explained, like we did this transformation. It took years. Like probably, we gave the opportunity to people to reconnect with their teams, right? So to actually, you have to understand profoundly the work. So you get back there and recall your developer days and actually get with the team and reconnect, right? There's no such a thing as I'm past that. Like I'm manager. Right. I don't kind of get my hands dirty. And we gave a ton of time to people to adapt, to adjust, and to reconnect. Some people didn't adapt and have to leave
And you have to take action quickly when that doesn't happen within management. I will tell you, very, very few of our associates have not made that transition. One of the scariest things that we work with especially our frontline managers, is a simple stat that says, in the new world, 50% of your time is spent coaching and developing people. And they always have these wide eyes and they say, 50% of my time, I already have 12 hours of meetings to fit into an 8-hour day. And then you start to, the paradox about lean, when management starts to think of lean not as something that I do in addition to my job, but it's the way that I do my job. So we have stand-ups or huddles for our frontline teams. Why do we not have stand-ups and huddles for our management teams? Why do we not have visual controls for management that keeps us focused on the things that are most important? And so that we can see, are we in management working on the things that are really important? Because sitting in your office or sitting at your desk and doing email or other administrative stuff is not the job we hired you for. It's to work with our people. Our customers will be impacted by the work that our developers do, not by what managers do.
So I want to add maybe a sort of somewhat different experience. So the work that I was a part of at Starbucks, I remember this kind of mantra we used to use, like sort of when it comes to problem solving or golf, play it where it lies. And so you sort of have the team, whether that's at the management level or the team member level, that you have. And so how can you achieve this kind of cultural transformation most successfully given kind of existing assets? And one of the kind of big transformational efforts that I was a part of at Starbucks was what was sort of referred to internally as the better ways. And it was a series of kind of problem-solving experiences that were created for store teams where they would take a problem area in the kind of operation and work to make it better. So an example of that might be poor quality for handcrafted espresso beverages. And so how can we address that problem? Or for brewed coffee, a lot of waste, while at the same time having stockouts. So on the one hand, throwing away a bunch of coffee because we're making too much, but on the other hand, a customer comes up and orders a cup, and we go, oh, sorry, we just ran out. That's kind of another problem that we did. And the approach that we eventually kind of discovered, we referred to as a leader-led approach. And there were several reasons why this was kind of chosen. But one of them, to this specific kind of topic, was to give really practical ways that leadership could get involved in this new way. So specifically, we would have someone even at like a director level or a VP level, pretty high level folks, actually go through this problem solving experience themselves at the work level. So a specific example that might be to ask a regional vice president, someone with a really big job, to go spend an hour in a Starbucks store and observe a problem directly with their own eyes, what the legal seafoods team would call mindful observation. So kind of see for themselves the reality of what's going on. Take measurements, collect facts, and really get close to it. Then, from someone who could, they would learn this better way of brewing coffee that would address these specific problems. But the purpose of them learning it was that in turn, they were going to have to train it to their next level leader, to their direct reports, which is a really intimidating thing. I mean, when you get when you're headed down, I guess, or closer to the work, those folks just know more about it than you do. They've got way more experience in it. In some cases, an executive at Starbucks may have literally never brewed a cup of coffee in their life. So that can be kind of an intimidating thing to not only learn this new way, but then be expected to train it. And that would kind of cascade. That like learning cascade would go all the way down. In the process of doing that, though, I think, again, back to this sort of thematic word here, this practical idea, in taking them through that experience, they were learning some very practical behaviors and actions that could be incorporated into this, kind of lean management system, these new lean leadership behaviors of going to see, engaging with the work, taking measurements, developing empathy, teaching, coaching once you've taught something new at that kind of next level down, and then day in and day out, continue to check on kind of how is performance improving or not. Really recast the role, for us anyway, of leaders as kind of these experts to be more of like a coach, and specifically to engage in kind of those actions that I laid out.
Can we open up for a Q&A from the public? So there's a mic there if anyone wants. I'm reviewing the Slido questions here. Number one here in the rank is, how did you get senior management of large public companies to move off of what features we'll get by then? How much will the total product cost and capital implication? How can we move that kind of a more fixed project, fixed outcomes way to a more fluid and agile way?
Sure. That's it's a kind of a journey. I like Kenny Larson at Slumberland Furniture. I think he had a great quote, which was, "Don't underestimate my perseverance to see this through." And that's kind of some of the approach that we had to utilize. You're in a company, if you're working for one of these large Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies like Nationwide, you're just simply not going to snap your fingers and all of a sudden everybody in management is going to believe in this agile, lean, DevOps, use whatever words that you like. It just won't happen. So I'm a much bigger fan of using this idea of model line. So we're taking something that's somewhat complex, but not too complex that we're probably going to fail, but is complex enough that people will actually believe it, that it has value for the company. Take that, do that really, really well, demonstrate that success, build some excitement around it, and slowly take that model line or that experiment out further and further. That's what we did. And so starting with 6 lines, we used 6 lines in the beginning in 2009, went to 30 lines within 8 months, or 30 teams, if you like that term better. And then fast forward to today, 275. But it was a slow burn. And up until just a couple years ago, not everybody in executive management liked that. They said, I need to know how much exactly it's going to cost and when you're going to deliver it. And sometimes you just had to have managerial courage and say, well, how well has that worked for you for the last 20 years? Because it hasn't. We're always over budget. Instead, let's look at a new way of doing things and really working with them kind of on a one-on-one basis in some cases.
Cool.
Because these are, the only other thing that I would add is sometimes when you dismiss this view of sometimes of some of these people, but these are all people that have become wealthy doing things the way they know how to do them. So for you to think that you're just going to come in there waving this lean or agile flag and all of a sudden they're going to say, sure, I'm bought in, it just doesn't happen. So one thing that I've used extensively is sometimes you can't convince your COO, your CEO, or others to use these to do a large-scale transformation on your own as the internal consultant. But what you can do is take them to visit other companies. Go on Gemba trips where you're going and looking at what other people have done, and put those CEOs, COOs, CIOs in front of those people, and that works tremendously well.
Question there?
Yeah, I like the advice about sort of developing empathy for the front line by actually sort of seeing the work or learning how to do the work. What if the work is really complex, like you haven't written a line of code in a long time? How do you develop empathy to get close to understanding?
Yeah, let me take that.
Work?
Like, so for example, what we done at CI&T, for example, we didn't ask our executives to go and write code, but we asked our team leaders to do that, right? And they were kind of much fresher. They actually got a little bit rusty because they kind of was a little bit off from years, but it was easier for them, and we gave them time, right? What we done ourselves is just set the example. That I will try to help you with some more like contract stuff and project management things, but I will get out of my corner room and actually help you with your issues, right? So I expect you to do the same, and I expect you to demand the same from your team leader. So that cascade down to that type of behavior, right?
So you're taking your expertise down a couple levels, not necessarily how to code, but
no, expertise in what I do, right? So I run the company, so I will help my leaders in their problems, right? And their problems are not code problems, right? But the way I try to engage with them, they will replicate, they will follow the example, right? And they will set the path, and guess what? The team leaders is actually getting down in the trenches and helping and learning, right? So by learning with the team and how the work is done, they're not as stupid anymore. They're not anymore the Dilbert's boss, right? I just learned for preparing for the session, actually, I was Googling to learn what's the name of the Dilbert's boss. Do you know what his name is? He doesn't have a name. It's so despicable, it doesn't deserve a name. Right? So I think with Lean, what we're trying to do is actually, take Dilbert out of business, right? So make it that like improved environment of our leadership skills, and it's not like a get out of the way and let people do the business, because the leaders are needed in big organizations to integrate the work of it. It's just insane to think that we're going to get rid of middle managers and this is going to work, right? We would not. The thing, we have to improve the level of leadership. We have to improve the leaders, so we take Dilberts out of business, and it's not fun anymore.
And if I may add to that, I think the one thing I'd say though is, for instance, I don't have a technology academic background, but I've been in technology now just by virtue of what I do. And what's interesting is, so I did some code, and then we have a weekly show and tell from our sprints, and then I had to actually show the results of my code. Somebody was coaching me along with it, and I fell flat on my face, and it was the most valuable show and tell we had, because that's another thing people like to see, is that their leaders fall flat on their face, and they make that an okay thing to do. So I actually think beyond just the learning what they do, which I think is really foundational, there's also a value of showing people that it's okay to fail from top down.
Cool. Question?
So, hi. So you're all rather high up in your organizations, and the kinds of transformation that you're talking about are kind of like leader initiated. And I'm wondering if you can speak to kind of more ground up, bottom up transformation. So when you have that engineering cell that wants to
Tom's high up now. When he started, it was not. I think.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you said that, because if we came across as, especially within Nationwide story, that it was top down, that's absolutely not the case. In fact, when we first started, they wouldn't even let us in the corporate headquarters campus. We were farmed out to the suburbs in this crappy building with a bunch of rented furniture. I remember so resolutely, because I had to call in the exterminators on a weekly basis. the sewer would back up onto the first floor. It was absolutely disgusting. So we had to, sometimes when people visit our campus now, they say, oh, well, we could never do this. Look at the cost and the investment and those sorts of things. And that actually wasn't the case. It was really grassroots led. But I think the moral or the outcome of the story is that we got to where we could get to with zero management support. And that was a handful of teams. That was very, very successful teams. But at that point in time, management could no longer ignore. We took the nationwide.com teams from a typical, let's say, a full functionality and reskin of a very, very large internet address, and would go in with thousands and thousands of defects, to using Agile, we would go in with similar size project with the amount of defects you could count on one hand. And all of a sudden, people are like, oh my God, this is fantastic. So it really did start as a grassroots effort. And so it's possible, but you have to have some people at that low level, at that frontline management, that are willing to put their necks on the line and say, we're gonna do this.
Yeah, you need some champions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about all the things that you can get into trouble, I remember facilities didn't want to let us put up whiteboards on the walls because there were stupid slogans. You know, like I had a conversation once that was just so ridiculous. The wall said "empower" on it, and they said, "Well, you can't put up a whiteboard there." And I was like, "Do you think that maybe we could actually empower people to use the space rather than writing your stupid slogan up there?" So. You know, sometimes you just have to kind of have that managerial courage within the front lines to make the change.
I want to add too that the kind of the Starbucks experience that I was a part of that began while I was running a coffee shop in Portland, Oregon, and there was a really small experiment, 4 little stores, and this, you know, enterprise-wide transformational approach that was developed was born from that like small little group. I mean, it was absolutely kind of a bottoms-up thing. And even kind of several years later in Howard Schultz's book, Onward, he tells that story and specifically describes that he had kind of heard that this thing was going on, really didn't know anything about it, wasn't bothered by it necessarily, but as it sort of caught on and more folks got involved in it, and he was engaging with them and hearing from them the value that they were receiving out of it. Not only that problems were being solved for customers, but development was happening within stores, more kind of store level, I guess, empowerment or problem solving. It really took him as kind of a big idea that would help transform the company. So that's sort of where it started.
Thank you.
Cool. Next one.
Hi, guys.
Probably the last one.
So, hey, you know, I just went through transformation like 6 months ago. Actually, we're still on it. I feel really identified with many other things about leadership coaching that you mentioned, so thanks for that. And one of the things that I'm kind of struggling with is to kind of understand, you know, how far ahead we need to plan work. Because my view of the thing is, you know, we need to plan certain work for maybe 3 months ahead, right? So we set some directions, goals, and where we want to be, right? And the discussion is always about, well, if we do that, we're coming back to waterfall, and we go back and forth in this discussion. So how do you do that in your organizations?
It's really tricky because the reality is just because you adopt lean, it doesn't mean you throw out the baby with the bathwater and the wisdom what comes with long-term planning, right? So it's really tricky. At first, we had these sort of what I call sort of like verbal police that would tell me, you can't have timelines, it's Agile. And so I think the way we did it, the sort of the split the baby in half, if you will, is what we do is we have, Hoshin Conry allows us to do long-term planning on what are the big boulders we'll put out there in terms of user experience or a new capability we'll bring upon to meet that standard of what we think the next level of capability that we need is, or the next level of client sort of solutions that we need. But then what we won't do is overly massage that quarter's work. So we're much more nimble about, you know, if we're going to be working on, let's say, analytics this quarter, that's what we're working on right now is analytics. If we're going to work on analytics, we don't overly sort of try to plan out the actual sort of work that needs to get done around that, because that's when you start disempowering people, because you start doing the planning more than you do the people and more than you do the experimentation around it. So that's kind of how we figured out the balance between the two.
So when you do that planning, you never go to the story level or the epic level?
No.
It's more high level, I'm
yeah,
guessing.
we might have epic level, a few quarters out, but for the most part, the planning is more of a business sort of direction,
Right.
and less about trying to do the story card. Because they get, as you know, they get dated really fast, and we actually have a threshold by which if we find that we have too much backlog, we will start stopping that, because we realize too much backlog is an indication you probably have bad stories and bad story cards in there eventually.
Thank you very much.
Guys, thumbs up. Thank you so much. We'll be happy to take the conversation to the launch. Thank you.